6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I got it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
Ranking review. Ranking review. Ranking review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Rankin Review. I am your host and Random Canadian Larry Parsons, and this episode, returning and regular guest Jason Dubray, he of the Shelf Shedding Movie Show, is going to help me rank and review 6 retro horror movies. We're going to set our sights on 6 movies that has a lot of exploitation, a lot of nostalgia, and kind of movie that maybe doesn't get made anymore. And maybe shouldn't? Question mark. I hope you like it. If you have feedback, you can send that to me at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. Check out the website at Ranknreview.ca, and please enter the podcast forewarned that there will be spoilers for the movies being reviewed, as well as coarse language, especially from me. Thank you so much for listening to Rank and Review. I hope you continue to do so. We drop every other Wednesday. Mr. Jason Dubray, once again, after some significant technical difficulties, here we sit to do another Rank and Review. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with the pandemic and all the madness that's going on. This is a list that's outside of your comfort zone. I'm calling it retro horrors because most of the movies we're talking about are from the very late 70s or the very early 80s, and they all represent that time for better or for worse. So I guess to start, other than welcoming you back, I would say, why did you choose this list, and do you regret it?
You've been very good to me. I mean, you did a Woody Allen show. You let me do another Stephen King episode. You've accommodated me, but one of the things you've been saying that's been a little bit different about this particular season of podcasts is there haven't been a lot of like straight up horror, and I wanted to do the next few to be like just straight up horror, and I really wanted to push my comfort zone, as you said. This wasn't, like some of the other shows that we did, the crime film shows or that kind of thing. So, and I wanted to find a list of where it was like an equal playing field, and this was my first time seeing all of these movies. So, right. And I had a lot of fun with this one.
I'm glad to hear that, for sure, because when I think of some of these titles, I think of myself being too young at a video store in small town Alberta and looking at the shelf and looking at these titles, particularly The Beast Within, had a really badass VHS large shell case. But it was forbidden. Yeah. It was one of those movies that I I'd have to get like someone bigger to rent for me, or I'd like a special circumstance would have to arise for me to see it. The guy at this video store there was strangely militant about what he would let me rent and what he wouldn't. Rambo was okay. Oh. Sorority Row was not. You know what I mean? He was really protecting me from the sexuality, not so much the violence, but the sexuality. And if there's something that's going to make people uncomfortable in this batch of movies, although one of them is rated PG for the record, but there is some, it's from that different age where the exploitation was unabashed. Nobody was ashamed of it. Nobody was particularly blushing about it. People pay their money to see sex and violence, and that's what we're going to deliver. And it's strange because it might not be the most popular opinion to have, but in a way, I respect their purity or their honesty. It seems like if they make an exploitation movie today, they have to be making a comment on it, or like it'd be admonishing the audience, saying shame on you for wanting this, but we're going to deliver it anyway, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm not really making excuses for it. It is what it is. I like seeing naked bodies. I like seeing violence. There is some sort of... That's the appeal of the horror genre in a lot of ways, this forbidden fruit. But I don't know. We've attached a lot more shame and a lot more baggage to it in the recent era. And of this age, these movies were just allowed to be what they are and what they were meant to be. So I respect them for that. But because you don't have that relationship with them, because you didn't covet them from a young age, because you don't like associate the sights and smells of like your vintage VHS era video store to these, you know, forbidden titles, it's a strange place for you to be in, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, I had forbidden titles, but I'm not sure they were from the same section of the video store. I mean, I had to spend... I nagged my father about Natural Born Killers for a solid year. Every time I was in a video store, can I rent Natural Born Killers? Can I rent Natural Born Killers? And finally, at the end of the school year, as a reward, I was allowed to rent it, but it was after nagging him for about a year. And then I had moved on to some other movie. But they were often kind of crime movies, or they were still within, you know, I guess the mainstream. And a lot of these movies, with the exception of maybe one, are very much outside of the mainstream cinema, even though we do see some familiar faces in some of these movies.
Yeah. I think you can cut this podcast kind of in half a little bit. There's 3 sort of transformation, sort of creature movies, maybe you could call them, and there's 3 sort of kind of slasher movies you could probably call them. But I think they have a similar flavor. I mean, there's a couple of outliers that we can talk about, but for the most part, I feel like they kind of belong together in some way. I also wanted to mention, of course, the Shelf Shedding Movie Show, hosted by Mr. Jason Dubray. Please check that out. Is your website up yet?
Yeah, website's live now. I'm not sure when this show's going to drop, but it's by this point it will have been... I'm guessing it will have been up for a few months here, but it's fairly new that it's live, and so I'm starting to work with it. It's a little bit of a different way of sending out my my podcast, but it will offer me a little bit more control, and I'm hoping I can get a little bit that connection I've been missing to iTunes and getting just a more varied audience. Like I looked at my demographic. And like everybody who had downloaded my show was from here, except for one from Bulgaria or something. I don't know how somebody from Bulgaria got on the episodes, but you know, so. Well,
that's how it started for me. It was basically a very small circle from, you know, Saskatchewan and area. Then I had some family in Edmonton, some family in Calgary, some friends that were listening to it, and then I'd get a random listener from Prince Edward Island who I did not know, and then I would get a random I got an email from a guy from Germany. You know, it's really nice when that happens, but. My advice, especially when you're starting this, because I'm quite a few years into it and I still have a pretty small audience, try to as best as you can ignore those numbers and try to as best as you can enjoy the show. I think because podcasts are forever, maybe the day comes where the show peaks and then people will be listening to those back episodes. But if you enjoy doing it, keep doing it. And I believe that the people will come. But that's my advice to you. I kind of jumped the rails there. Is there anything you would like to say about retro horror or about this selection before I list off the movies and we start talking about them?
No, I mean, I really surprised myself in 2 ways. One was that I was able to find these movies fairly easily, and the second one was just how much fun I had with looking at these.
Okay. So this is the order I have the stack in. We'll discuss the order, but we're going to talk about Terror Train, a vintage 1980 slasher movie starring the Scream Queen herself, Jamie Lee Curtis. Then we're going to talk about Altered States, which was the feature film debut of William Hurt, a man who I met and had a long discussion about Richard III with. Then we're going to talk about a very odd movie called The Tourist Trap. It's sort of a slasher movie, but there's also some supernatural going on, and maybe just a hint of madness. The Beast Within, another very strange, infamous 80s practical effect creature number. The Initiation, which introduced the world to Daphne Zuniga. If anybody out there knows who cares who Daphne Zuniga is still. And we're going to finish it off with the Roger Corman cult classic, Humanoids from the Deep, also found in some areas just as Monster, which is weird because there's quite a few monsters in the movie. Thank you so much for being here, Jason.
I don't want to get back on that track. Right here! Nobody does! Help! Please! Nice gag, help me! Help! You'll die. At this temperature, you'll die. You'll die. Come on, Mo! Come on! Mo!
For the students aboard, it's going to be the one party to end them all.
They're always walking out of my parties. But this time, you can't.
For me, Terror Train is one of those slasher movies that's like such of its time and period that like in a way it gets a pass for a lot of the cliches of the genre that people will regularly complain about just because it was a relatively new thing that was being explored here. The whole Jamie Lee Curtis as the Scream Queen, the template of a person who was wronged and decides to seek revenge on a group of people, we're going to see again and again. The idea of taking a holiday, in this case New Year's Eve, and exploiting that for scares, we're going to see that kind of thing happen again and again. The idea of setting a slasher movie on a train is not a bad one. It's a claustrophobic environment. The idea of all the characters wearing costumes is by itself not a bad idea because it sort of helps the, who's the killer, where's the killer. There's a lot of, claustrophobic things that could go on. So I want to be sitting here saying, here's a great example of an underappreciated 80s horror gem. But somehow it doesn't hold its weight amongst the Friday the 13th of the world and the Halloweens of the world. I don't think it meets that level. Even this early in the cycle of the slasher genre, there's a lot of air in the proceedings here. There's a lot of stuff with the train, crew talking amongst themselves that seems to be blind filler. They actually have David Copperfield himself show up in the movie and do legit magic tricks. And
Yes.
That's a fallacy of filmmaking, the idea of showing a magic show on film. You have to see it live, or else the trick is not the trick. In the world of cinema, any trick can be used to deceive us, and we understand that. So as much as those illusions might have been really genuinely amazing to see live, on film, they just kind of feel like filler, which is what they are. Does the film have some interesting qualities? Yes, they have a gay character in a time and place where gay characters were rarely even acknowledged, let alone, mentioned. And there's some interesting moments, but I just can't get super excited about Terror Train. Is the problem me, or is the problem the train?
Well, I think I was trying to figure out, this was the first one I started with this list, and I was trying to figure out why I had not heard of it. It's came out the same year as Friday the 13th, if I'm not mistaken.
1980?
1980. Yeah. And it'd been, 4 or 6 years since Black Christmas really kind of started us off. And a year after Halloween. Year after Halloween?
A couple years
Or
after
2 years?
Halloween, yeah. I want to say 78 for Halloween.
And Jamie Lee Curtis kind of was becoming the it girl at that time. And so it was interesting. I just didn't know about this movie and this movie in her canon of films. And it has its problems. And you mentioned one of the big ones is we have a ridiculously long sequence with this magic show. And I was having the same thought you were, that we don't have enough to fill up an hour-and-a-half movie here, so let's just spend a whole bunch of time with David Copperfield.
Yeah.
I take great pains to make David Copperfield look creepy and look like a suspect in this, and that's just how he looks, I guess. But at no point did I ever think that David Copperfield was going to be the killer on this train. I enjoyed it. I mean, as much as I was writing tons of notes, and but I wasn't fighting the movie. Like, sometimes I fight a movie like this a little bit, and I was entertained by it. I predicted the plot twist, like pretty much from the beginning, but I still enjoyed the ride enough.
So when you say you predicted the plot twist, did you predict that the vengeful student was posing as the magician's assistant?
Not completely like that, but I knew that the student was behind it. I mean, I also knew that there was something with the magician's assistant that was just too obvious, particularly when, and I really like Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson's in here playing the kind of the train conductor or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, he has some pretty stupid lines to say, but he delivers them like a pro, right?
Yeah.
But when there's all that business about, oh, David Copperfield or whatever his character, the magician, is so evil, he must be the killer, everybody is convinced of it, and there's this big production made, oh, come over here, and they get the assistant to the back of the train to protect her. I was like, yeah, that's somehow either the assistant is partnered up with the vengeful student, or there's some other thing. And so again, I have seen movies from later in the 80s where the cross-dressing idea is brought into it, particularly in Brian De Palma films. So
it really it is a thing of the era and of the genre, unfortunately, that like somehow posing as a woman, somehow homosexuality, somehow mommy issues. Maybe it comes from Psycho, the great grandpappy of them all, but that seems to be like a symptom of you being psychotic, that there's some sort of homosexual affectation to you, which is unfortunate, and which was what led to movies like The Silence of the Lambs getting picketed and stuff like this. Yes, I understand that can be problematic. I don't think that they were trying to make any kind of statement here, but when I saw it at a young age, I did not catch the twist. And I recognized the formula early enough in these movies that was a rare enough thing to make this movie kind of memorable to me. Yes, of course, this guy's going to be seeking revenge, but I didn't think he was going to be posing as this woman. That never occurred to me. Now, maybe it's a ho-hum twist today in 2020, but in 1980, that kind of melted my brain a little bit, and I gave the movie points for that.
Like, how old do you think you were when you first saw this movie?
I'm going to say 12 or 13.
Yeah, and I think if I'm watching it for the first time at 12 or 13, I'm going to be wowed by that twist. But at 40, I've seen enough movies that, you know, I was like, oh, of course, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, for a little while there, I was doubting my theory that it's the vengeful student, but it's the only thing that makes sense. Like, why would you have the entire opening sequence come out the way it does there? Yeah.
I think the prank is a little too harsh. I would have also liked it if it was... I mean, obviously there was an accident in that, like, they got the kid committed and drove him insane, but there was no humor to that prank. It was pure darkness, which made our victims less sympathetic. It's not necessarily that they deserve brutal deaths, but that prank, putting that, like, picked-upon kid in a bed with a dead body because he thinks he thinks he's going to be having sex for the first time, and he gets into bed and there's like a cadaver they've stolen from the medical center or the morgue or whatever. Like, that is traumatizing. That is not funny. And even though Jamie Lee Curtis didn't fully understand the whole breadth of the prank, she's still responsible and she still needs to own it. Now, again, they need to get killed? She agreed
to do it. Yeah, I did just that choice. The idea is that she's a stupid first year or whatever. But here's one of my, if I'm going to fight the movie a little bit, these are all supposed to be medical students, right?
Yes.
And the only one I believe that was intelligent enough to be a medical student is Jamie Lee Curtis. But
it did feel very high school. The first almost half of the movie seems to really be taking its time. And to its credit, I mean, it's establishing some characters, it's establishing some atmosphere. But once it goes into the full-bore slasher phase, it gets into a mad hurry. Like, at the end, when the killer is finally kicked off the train and his body gets, like, rinsed down into this icy river, we smash cut to credits, and, like, the movie is over before you realize, even have time to, like, be satisfied, you know? It doesn't feel like the climax has been reached, and the credits are already running.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I actually have that note down for another one of the movies we're going to talk about too, where all this stuff happens really fast, and then like there's no resolution of any kind.
The end.
And, yeah, I mean, I think the third act is, you know, it is effective. I mean, the cat and mouse game that goes on with Jamie Lee Curtis for the most part, with some others, and I think it is exciting and it's fun to watch. And so, again, I'm probably singing its praises a little bit too much. I mean, there's just some silly stuff. There's some pretty hammy acting, in particular in that opening sequence when the whole prank happens. The guy stands up and starts wrapping himself into some bed curtains or something, and it does not look like a reaction any human being would have, as traumatic as it is or not. And then that image is repeated late in the film too, and I'm just like, okay, this guy is unstable, and this is like the capital P psychopath, but it does not have any sort of, and maybe I'm asking too much for some naturalism in a movie called Terror Train, but yeah, so it's tough for me to feel sorry for him or like him, but it was also tough for me to feel sorry for the bullies, because we've talked about bullies in the past and how much I don't always mind seeing them get their comeuppance in a horror movie, knowing that it is fictional, not real life.
No tears are shed. Did you recognize Hart Bochner, I believe the name is?
Sorry, you cut out.
Did you recognize a young performance from Hart Bochner, I believe his name is? He, about 4 years or 8 years after this, would show up in a little movie called Die Hard as this coke addict who thinks he can talk his way out of a negotiation with Hans Gruber. It's just interesting.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see his face. Yeah. He's quite young in this movie, but it's totally the same guy, and he's totally got that smug asshole face. Like, you get why he gets cast in these roles. He's probably a totally nice guy, but alas.
I feel about his death the same way I feel about his Die Hard death. You know, it's just like these, you know, I don't know, they're kind of get what you deserve, and if you're a character acting like this in a movie like this, then that's what's going to happen.
I think part of the places where the movie flinched a little bit too is the violence. After Friday the 13th, it wasn't just enough for there to be a suspense and then a cutaway. People started getting a little bit bloodthirsty. Part of the payoff was seeing the actual, you know, visceral blood and violence. And this movie's instinct is to cut away at the last second, which traditionally had been how it was done. But Friday the 13th moved the bar, and you either moved with it or else, you know, you became a less remembered slasher movie. And I think consequently, Terror Train is sort of a less remembered slasher movie. It's not horrible, but it's not great.
And in fairness, it came out the same year, so it was probably filmed in 79 without necessarily having knowledge of what Friday the 13th and the impact Friday the 13th would have. It's kind of interesting, the retro idea too. There's some scenes which are very 80s, and there's some scenes which you could tell are very late 70s. And I feel like the magic show and the dance area, the party area, that's very 70s. But then the glasses and the costuming and the hairstyles are very 80s. So it's kind of a strange hybrid of the 70s and 80s together in here. Yeah, it gets a pass for me. I mean, I'm not going to be like drooling about any of these movies really, but I I enjoyed it a lot more than, and maybe it's because I had such low expectations for it.
Yeah.
But it was entertaining, and I had some fun with it, and I think it's a pretty solid horror movie. I want to mention it's a Canadian director, Roger Spotswood.
Yep.
He went on to direct a James Bond film and also a very good HBO movie called And the Band Played On.
Oh, he directed And the Band. I really like that. Yeah. If you like the aesthetic of 80s slasher movies, this is another one. It's not amazing, but it's not awful, right?
Yeah, it's good.
In the basement of one of the country's leading medical schools, Dr. Edward Jessup, candidate for a Nobel Prize, is conducting the most dangerous experiment in the history of science. And the subject of the experiment is himself.
Ask him what kind of an experience I can expect.
It's deafening. The noise is deafening.
It's blacked out.
What happens during these blackout periods is you get the feeling of phenomenal acceleration, like you're being shot out over millions, billions of years. Time simply obliterates.
You guys are shooting off with an untested drug that stacks up in the brain and works in the nucleus of the cell, and you don't call that dangerous.
I'm asking you to put the experiment off until we understand a little more in order to minimize the risk.
Way.
I'm really frightened. We could be screwing around with his whole genetic structure. Now, how do we stop this?
We've got millions of years stored away in that computer bank we call our minds. We have got trillions of dormant genes in us, our whole evolutionary past. Perhaps I've tapped into that.
So I've talked a few times in the past about Ken Russell, and he's a really weird filmmaker. I mean, you can go into it knowing that you're probably going to see something you haven't seen before, but it's not necessarily a guarantee of quality or the guarantee you're going to see something that you necessarily wanted to see before. He's an interesting wild card. I kind of place Lynch actually in this same measure, in that I don't really know what I'm going to get from a Lynch movie, whereas with Ken Russell, I come in a little bit hopeful. I've gotten to the point with Lynch where I'm a little bit apprehensive going in, but I always want the movies to be good. The subject of Altered States is a young, ambitious scientist decides he wants to basically become what's called a psychonaut, which means you inject your body with LSD or psilocybin or whatever hallucinogenic chemicals you can get your hands on. And to add to the experience, you go into a sensory deprivation chamber in which you are floating in water and in complete darkness, and you go on this crazy head trip and of inner exploration. And a lot of creative thinkers and writers swear by these kick down creative doors, and that it could be the key that will cure the world, or it's just a really fun high. Right? It's just some hippie. But it's an interesting subject to explore in movies, period, and I think a really interesting subject to explore in a horror movie. You can destroy yourself, you can have a psychotic outburst, or, as this movie posits, maybe you can actually physically transform. But in the end, how much is real and how much is not? And is that what the movie is about? I like the movie. It is a head scratcher of a movie. It is very definitely made in 1980. And if that's going to be a problem for you, then that's going to be a problem for you. But the movie's interesting. And it's interesting enough to hold my attention. I do have some problems with it, but overall, my interest in the subject eclipses everything else. And I walk away mainly happy with the movie. Mm-hmm. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. What was interesting, this was the last one I watched, and I felt the pace, because it's much, much slower pace than any one of the other movies we look at. It's actually, there are two movies which I think are a little bit more polished and maybe a little bit more, for lack of a better term, professionally made. And this one feels to me like the most professional, the best budget. We have Bob Balaban in here, who's absolutely terrific. I love seeing him in anything. And it's the special effects are great. The music score is outstanding. I really enjoyed Altered States, but then I was like, what is this? What is my hesitation to say hands down this is the best movie of the 6 that we're looking at? And I think it's just it really, really takes its time. But I also want to pay it a compliment in a way that it reminds me of 2001: A Space Odyssey in some places. It maybe is a little bit more, for lack of a better term, structured. You can pinpoint what this movie's about a little bit easier than with 2001: A Space Odyssey. But I enjoyed seeing back, like, the visuals are outstanding. It is quite a remarkable film. I wasn't aware that it was William Hurt's big screen debut. And I mean, he was a leading man from the beginning, is what that says to me, because it's just a pleasure seeing him in this movie. I really enjoyed it, but this is the one where I mentioned that we have this rather dramatic climax that happens, and then it stops and credits roll.
Yep.
I thought we might have a moment or two. I don't need much, because maybe one of the faults, we've talked about Stephen King a lot when we're reading his books, is we've reached the climax and then we have another 100 pages of resolution. We find out what happened to every single character and every single location. I don't need that, but I think after what happens in the climax of this movie, there needs to be a little bit of a breather and a more natural transition into the end, if I was to be critical. So that and the pace. But other than that, I totally agree with you. It's a really interesting piece. I quite like the sequence, even though it may be problematic in 2020. But the sequence in Mexico, where he goes and he takes that
peyote or something. Is it peyote or mescaline, or I don't remember.
Yeah. But that's been used in other movies, and I don't think it was any more offensive than it is in other things I've seen. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are made uncomfortable with the religious imagery and the goats with the eyes and the crucifixions and stuff like that. But it's not just a measure of exploitation. It is very common. People who have psychotic breaks very commonly have religious visions. They're described religious imagery. It's almost like a flavor of schizophrenia to be visited by angels or demons, or convinced that you're the devil, or that you're God or Jesus. So it does come from a place. I mean, I do believe that the sources, the material was well researched and they were legitimately interested in it.
Yeah.
I think
there's also there's also the battle within Hurt himself. He's a scientist, but comes from a religious background, and about the death of his father had a big impact, and then that plays into a lot of these drug trips or hallucinations or whatever, and so I thought it made perfect sense to have the religious imagery besides the fact that would legitimately happen in if somebody was to take whatever this was.
Yeah. I don't know, and I don't know. Like, he does a whole bunch of different things, and I don't necessarily know the difference between one and the other. They're all psychotropics. They're all like LSD. They make you trip balls, as it were.
Yeah.
This was also coming off the backs of, I think it's right to mention 2001, but I think horror movies that came out recently, there was a lot of religiously themed horror. The Exorcist, The Omen, The Sentinel. This was, again, it's sort of split in the line between sci-fi, drama, and horror. It's kind of like everything in a bucket at once, which is kind of what's good and bad about the movie when all is said and done. But it reflects the themes of the time, and in its pace, it kind of reflects the way movies were made at the time. I find that movies of the late 70s and early 80s have way more air in them than any movie will allow today. Even editing my own pictures, like, in the 80s, they will show the scene where the car pulls up in the driveway and the guy gets out of the car and he lifts his bag out of the car and he walks to the front door and he opens the door. Whereas nowadays, we smash cut and he's already in his house cooking supper. It's just how we do things. I think an argument can be made for both, but you should have a reason why you're doing one or the other. And at this time and place, they showed us a lot of behavior. What did you think of the relationships in the movies? Like the way William's Hurt character, I guess, like he's very coveted, he's incredibly intelligent, and he's handsome. But he's kind of a dick, right? He's so obsessed, it's so much about him that he can't even pretend to his girlfriend while he's with her intimately that 100% of his brain is checked into it. And I think it was one of those things, if they were going to do so little with it, why did they bother? And if he cared so little about her, why was she the one that, quote, saved him?
That piece is kind of curious in a way, because it starts off with their relationship and then they have sex, and then like he's just really not that interested or doesn't understand what love is. And it seems like out of convenience they get married, and we flash forward pretty abruptly to him being a family man in Boston, and then all of a sudden they're getting divorced, and then he's going off to Mexico, and then he's doing all these experiments. But then his ex-wife becomes his greatest ally. But it's a very strange relationship. I guess it's the flip side to often in the movies when you see divorced people, it's a real melodrama. They hate each other, and there's all these theatrics connected to it. But these are very cerebral people, and they just kind of take things as they come. So that's maybe okay. But yeah, I agree with you. Like what's kind of the point of all that? The courtship, if we just move forward like that, and then to the point where the marriage is pretty much over. It's
especially in a movie where we feel there's so much fat on the movie that you kind of feel you don't need scenes to go on as long as they do anyway. Why is that there if you're not going to do anything with it? What I will compliment though is the special effects. As 1980 as they are, they're so specific to the time, but they fit in the movie perfectly, and they are still, I guess, to you, for lack of a better word, trippy. Like, they are very strange, and they will remain strange. No one would make those choices today. Like, you're only going to see that kind of effect in Altered States. I mean, I think that the transformation sequences in the light show hallucinogenic, which definitely, I think you're right to mention 2001 as an influence are there. They're actually in their own way more interesting than the 2001 light tunnel at the end of that movie. Again, I think in the 60s that blew your mind, but in 2020 it's like, yeah, okay, it's a grid of lights. Thank you.
I'm a defender of it, I guess, the 2001 light show. I like both for what they are, yeah.
But they're very specific to their time. Like I say, they wouldn't be even emulated today because they just show what they are. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the closest would be Annihilation from, what was it, last year when that was released, and that blew my mind. I mean, that was the only movie I've seen in a while that was like that. Yet those effects are way different than the effects in these movies. But I think you can show this movie to other than the pace to somebody in a modern audience, and I don't think they're going to be too distracted by the effects. I think they'll like it as opposed to some special effects movies, other special effects movies in the 80s where it hasn't aged as well, and you have to sort of explain how wonderful practical effects are and how much better they are than CGI to younger people. But in my biased opinion. But I really, it's really amazing what is done here, and Russell deserves credit for his vision for Altered States.
You have not seen a movie like this. It's interesting too when we finally get to the famous transformation. Initially, he, instead of kicking down the door to some new knowledge, some sort of, game-changing enlightenment, he physically regresses to a Neanderthal. And I've always taken it, and again, I saw this at a young age, when he was glitching in and out of reality, that was some version of him doing the opposite of that, starting to progress into the future, but his brain couldn't handle what a future human felt and was like, because it was just so different. And these are some heavy ideas to be pouring, into people's heads. It's also interesting to me that it's got a fan in the drug community. I mean, I know it's about drugs and hallucinating, but I don't know that it's a very positive portrayal of that. I don't know that I watch Altered States and I say, gee, I want to do that. I do not.
It's not Dazed and Confused, or I don't know.
Well, it's not fun. It would be a bad trip. You'd think it would be like, yikes, Give me a nice, lice-friendly Pixar cartoon, man. I don't know. It is undeniably fascinating and I think worth watching. There's some aesthetic hurdles to get over, but that's the main thing to get over.
I think of this list of 6, if I was to recommend one movie to somebody who's maybe not a fan of the retro horror, to paint it with a broad brush here, I would say Altered States would be the one I would recommend to more people than any of the others on the list, even though it may or may not be the top of my list.
All right. Well, to be continued.
Terror you can feel. Heart-stopping suspense that makes this the nightmare that never ends. Something crazy's going on at the tourist trap.
Charles Band is a figure in horror movies. I mean, some people really love him, some people really hate him. His whole raison d'etre is to make horror movies as cheaply as possible. But I'm talking like even Roger Corman might blush a little bit at the corners that get cut in the Full Moon Features sort of catalog. And they don't do unambitious movies. These are the people that bring you the Doll Man franchise and these rather ambitious ideas for horror movies, but they do them for $2 and mainly release them direct to video, and they kind of, for their time, and I mean they still exist, but they're in that niche. They're like Trauma or Asylum, where part of their badge is that we do horror movies cheap, deal with it. I prefer them in a way to Trauma and Asylum because at least Full Moon Features, in my mind, tries to make legit movies. They handicap themselves by making the budget so weak and the acting so terrible usually, but they're earnestly trying to make a horror movie. Whereas Trauma will wink at you and say, look how stupid and cheesy we're being. Full Moon really wants to bring you the goods, and there are people who really do like Full Moon. I'm not one of them. I prefer my bad films to be unintentionally bad. And I do think that there's something to be said for understanding your budget. If you're a micro-budget movie, that's fine. Know that you're a micro-budget movie and behave like it. But every now and then, Charles Band and his production company actually kick one out that works for me. And this is one of their very earliest ones. It's called Tourist Trap. And it does work for me. It's weird that it works for me because there's all of this stuff that shouldn't work. There's a real chaos to the movie. Is it a slasher movie? Is it a supernatural movie? Is it about madness? Is it about, going to the wrong place at the wrong time? I think we all know the idea of this sort of out of out of the way place that basically is a convenience store or a restaurant, and then attached to it has a bunch of displays, like an adorable, garage sale version of a museum. And it'll usually have some local history or local color into it. And they are kind of charming and kind of sad and kind of pathetic, all wrapped up in a nice little bow. They're just, people sort of trying to make their area of the world special. And it's the equivalent, I think, of, the small towns we have in Saskatchewan that have big things outside of them. Our town has the world's biggest pierogi in front of it, and our town has the world's biggest, horseshoe in front of it. It's charming, but also kind of sad. But an interesting, what kind of guy runs that place, and what kind of guy really likes his corner of the world so much that he's going to basically define himself by it. In this case, we have a family that sort of were running this place, and once they moved the highway, which is a classic thing, just like in Psycho, they moved the highway away, all of their madness seemed to be exacerbated. But the mannequins add a real wild card for me. I don't typically think that I'm scared of mannequins. As a rule, I worked at a department store and I would be there after hours. Didn't have a problem with the mannequins in the front or in the storeroom. Never really thought about it. Never really bothered me. But the mannequins in this movie, I think, are super creepy. And I think for a slasher movie with a PG rating, it has surprising teeth. I saw it at a young age and I never forgot it. Again, it's of its time. It is what it is, and I certainly don't want to oversell it, but I think for its modest ambition, Tourist Trap totally works. Am I crazy?
I think it makes you feel uncomfortable. So you mentioned Psycho. I would also mention a couple of horror movies, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It has that kind of feel to it. And as far as the mannequins, in some ways it remind me a little bit of House of Wax, the remake of House of Wax, I guess. And it's just because these mannequins are too human. And the mannequins you would have been dealing with were quite obviously mannequins.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm not normally, it almost feels like a gimmick in most films, but I think that separates it from being just god awful to being, kind of, it's, I could say I was creeped out. I can say that, I was kind of freaked out by things and I was made to feel uncomfortable. And if horror is supposed to do that, it was successful in that way. Just the stuff that I sometimes get kind of picky about, like story, script, direction, acting, are problematic in here. But
just the story, script, the acting, and directing, that's all?
Yeah, that's it. But I got the creepy feeling from it, so I'll give it points for that. So I'm trying hard to not be too negative.
You can be as negative as you want, man.
Yeah, this felt the most retro of the movies that we've seen, and this is the most 70s of the movies. And it really doesn't have, you're right, doesn't have much polish. Chuck Connors is the guy running this tourist trap or whatever, and he's just a cartoon. It's just absolutely ridiculous, but maybe not. I sometimes am okay with cartoons, not as much here. Just every time he comes in, I could see him acting, and I feel like I should be more afraid of him than I am, and there's nothing in there that really surprised me either, because I've seen enough of these movies. And I'm just like, anybody who trusts this guy, I don't understand. Have you been paying any attention to what's been going on? Mind you, I think you have a line there that people who are in horror movies don't realize they're in horror movies. So usually. I guess they're just, this is an eccentric, lonely old man who runs this place, so we should just take him as such. One of the problems with some of these movies is where I can't seem to connect with somebody that I like. We do have somebody who I pegged as our survivor girl in here. There was this the blonde-haired girl who's kind of nice to Chuck Connors at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't immediately get like she has some freaky scenes, but the others get worse treatment, I would say, as we go along. And they're going to, because they laugh at him behind his back, and they're doing all the things you're not supposed to do in a movie like this.
They're disrespectful, but they don't deserve what they're getting. Also, that the main character has this sort of good old boy, aw shucks cowboy thing. He used to star apparently in an old Western TV show. He had a career. This is not where his big break. This is where he washed up. Was Tourist Trap, but. I don't think it was a surprise. You're right that the guy that keeps on going out of his way to separate these group of teenagers who stop at the wrong place to fix a flat tire, and one of them goes missing, and they're basically stuck there. Very Texas Chainsaw Massacre in premise, but yeah, I don't think we're surprised by that twist. But I think that we're expected that the characters are to be. For me, the weirdness is, well, like I said, the mannequins, like when all the mannequins start whispering right before one of them are going to be killed, like, what was that about? Where did that even come from? Or some of the psychic Carrie kills that happens. At the very beginning, one guy gets, like, doors are opening and closing and shit's flying across the room. Yep. So, like, okay, so he's not just a serial killer. He's not just some guy who went crazy. There is something supernatural. He does know that he's got a split personality at some points, but then there are other points where he really doesn't seem like a lot of it seems like there was too many people throwing too many different ideas and they just kept all of them, whether or not they made sense. And like, you're right, like it's discordant. It doesn't make sense. And I would be more upset with it if I didn't think somehow it works for me. I don't think it was even on purpose. Jason, like, I don't like... The whispering mannequins was creepy, and somebody on set said, wouldn't it be creepy if the mannequins whispered? And they all agreed. They didn't ask why the mannequins whispered, right? But they did it. Let's do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's this uncanny valley thing. There also is, I think, a legit creepy kill when he suffocates this one woman with the mask or the plasters, like... He has her on the table with everything covered except for eyes and nose, or mouth and nose, and he tells her what he's going to do, and then he does it, and she dies. Yes. And it's brutal. It's a PG kill. It's not a bloody kill, but it's icky. It's like not a good thing to watch.
It's a very ugly sequence, but I mean I was looking for capital H horror with this group of movies, and I got it here. So. Again, I think the horror factor is strong. I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, there are some really strange... You mentioned that opening sequence is very odd. Plus, we had that voice, and that voice acting was very distracting. So it was kind of like announcing to us, this is not going to be a great movie, but go along for the ride if you dare. I would probably have trouble recommending this to a ton of people, unless they are horror fans and they're fans of low budget 70s horror. I mean, I can't quite recommend it. Yet there's a part of me that wants to recommend some moments in it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, I get you. And again, I it's one of these movies, like, I can be so hard on a $200 million science fiction movie, right? I will be so shitty to it. But, like, a $200,000 scrappy horror movie that, like, somehow accidentally manages a few moments of magic, for some reason that excites me more than a ho-hum big budget. So, like, am I giving this more rope than I maybe should? Yeah, and like the whole time I'm giving this movie, and I do give it a conditional thumbs up review, I'm kind of bemused by it. It's one of those movies that, like, it works for me in spite of itself. But there's something intensely charming and strange about Tourist Trap for me. So I don't know.
Yeah, I guess just, and in general for a movie like this, just maybe you can explain it to me, just why the acting is generally as bad as it is. Like, I can sort of understand why some other stuff is a little bit of a mess, and you don't have the budget to do other things. But why is the acting? Because you made, Book of Trespasses, and the acting's very good in Book of Trespasses, and you made that on a budget, right?
Well, it's all a matter of who you know. Like they got this old time cowboy to star as their killer, and that was the name that they got for the movie, right? Everybody, well, that's not true. One of the girls in the movie was Charlie's Angel at one point, apparently, but that was before my time. That certainly wasn't the reason I watched the movie. But a lot of the time with these low-budget movies, the production money gets spent on the effects and the sets, and they're not as fussy about the cast. They can't lure in big stars unless they spend a third of their budget on the star, and they would rather spend the money elsewhere. And a lot of times, instead of going through even the bother of having a casting person, right? They just, who can we get? Who do we know? Oh, I know a guy who was in a play once. Hell, George Romero, two of the main stars of Dawn of the Dead, were working in a restaurant Romero was at. And one of them was waiting his table, and he heard that they were doing auditions, and he asked if he could audition. And the other one was in the kitchen, and when he heard that the waiter was auditioning, asked if he could audition too. 2 of the 4 main characters of Dawn of the Dead got that. Okay, I'm not saying that's good. In fact, some of the acting in Dawn of the Dead's wonky too, but I'm saying that's how it was done. They would make do with what they got. I happened to grow up in the theater community and did studying at the drama department, and I've got a lot of friends who are good actors, so that was a card I could play. But not everybody knows a lot. Not everybody has like a lot of good actors in their immediate friend group. That was just me being lucky. Obviously, Charles Band at this point in his career didn't have a lot of really great actors around him. In a way, the over-the-top crazy performance is such part of the 80s aesthetic that even though I recognize it as being kind of cringy, part of me likes it too. And even a bad performance adds to the strange, perfect aesthetic of an 80s movie. It's weird. Again, I'm making excuses and I shouldn't. Is there bad performances in this movie? Yeah. Does it make sense wall to wall? No. Did I enjoy myself watching it? Yes.
And that's the main thing.
I just completely discredited myself as a critic. Boom.
Warning. This preview cannot show all of the terrifying and grotesque transformation sequences from the last 30 minutes of The Beast Within. The filmmakers strongly suggest that those who may be shocked by this unique, horrifying movie use caution when seeing the film. There's something inside of Michael.
Never seen anything like it before.
Something that's been waiting, watching, and growing.
Michael?
Something evil.
I know you're in here.
And whatever it is ready to be released.
I have such a clear picture in my mind of this VHS shell case of The Beast Within. It had such a scary picture on the cover of it, and it was infamous. It had this crazy transformation sequence in it. This was popular in the early 80s, largely due to An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, that they would do a really sort of show-stopping transformation sequence. In a way, that in itself could justify a movie. Even the advertising for The Beast Within recognizes how top-heavy the movie is, saying, the last 30 minutes of this movie has some of the most crazy special effects you've ever seen. It does have some pretty crazy, of the era practical special effects. But in the end, The Beast Within, when I finally got to watch it and finally get to, see it and, having it all built up in my mind, it is fundamentally disappointing and kind of impressive at the same time. Like, there is really cool special effects in it, and the story is kind of pleasingly crazy. It's bonkers. It's like a were cicada that we're dealing with here, and that's really strange. But in the end, especially watching The Beast Within in 2020, I'm like this sort of nostalgic charm that I found in some of these other titles. I felt myself thinking one word over and over and over in my head. Remake. 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 And it's weird because I don't think this movie relies on the 80s aesthetic as much as the other ones.
No.
It is fundamentally a tragic story that could have been interesting. They just chose to go another way with it. A couple have car troubles outside the bayou, and the husband, Ronnie Cox, goes to get some mechanic or tow truck, and while he's away, his dog is murdered and his wife is raped by some crazy creature. It's not particularly graphic in its portrayal. It's not going to like spoil your meal. I've said in the past on the podcast, I'm not particularly a fan of rape in movies, but it is a story point. We fast forward to 16 years later, and their teenage son is having a bunch of bizarre medical issues that they can't seem to understand. And out of desperation, they finally uncork the secret that his mother was raped by this, well, she called it a creature. He had to assume it was a man, but they look into it. There's a whole community. There's a whole conspiracy behind it. We know exactly where the movie's going. We know exactly what's going to happen. We know exactly how it's going to resolve. And we're completely right about all of it. And we have a show-stopping transformation sequence. And especially in the time it came out, it was quite impressive. But in the end, emotionally, the movie doesn't connect. And it's a tragedy. Essentially, we have, like, this kid, through no wrong of his own, through some forced genetic, possession, becomes a creature and kills people. And he begs his parents to kill him, to stop him from becoming this monster. But the parents, it's their son. As far as they're concerned, he's not a monster. They know who he is. There's a lot of real dramatic stakes and a lot of real, empathy and drama to be brought out of that. But what we get is a very simplistic monster movie and a very simplistic mamby-pamby, the communities covering their secrets and the powers that be. And I don't know, I just wish that the movie could have lived up to how excited I was about it when I was that little kid in that video store looking at it. It's a movie that I want to be better than it is. And maybe for that reason, I'm more angry at it than I should be, but I end up kind of disappointed with The Beast Within, while dropping the caveat that it has a couple of truly awesome moments. That's it. That's all. That's where I start.
You certainly had a different journey with this movie than I have. I was just, as you were describing it, and I really enjoyed that introduction a lot. You and Lee introduced me to this wonderfully dark horror movie called The Children.
Right.
And so the stakes of parents having to kill their kids has a lot of potential. It has a lot of potential, but that's not realized here. So I didn't have any history of, because I know that exact feeling that you have about, you saw this movie you wanted to see on the shelf at the video store, and either you weren't allowed, they wouldn't let you rent it, or you couldn't get an adult to rent it for you or whatever. So built up like it's going to be absolutely spectacular. And it turns out to be this. Here, I was kind of this is at the tail end of watching these 6 movies. And this is the other one I would say that looks professionally made. I think it, the way it looks, I mean, you can tell it's the 80s, but it does hold up compared to a few of the other movies that we're looking at. I really didn't like it at all. And by that point I was excited because I had been enjoying myself with some movies that I never thought, just based on the surface, that I would end up enjoying. And this one frustrated me. I don't know what exactly it was that frustrated me, but I think part of the problem is, and you do have to feel bad for this boy who is stuck with this curse, but I didn't care about him at all. Like, he was not that interesting.
I don't think he's much of an actor.
I don't know if that's the actor's fault.
Yeah, I don't think that he's much of an actor.
Maybe that's.
I think Ronnie Cox, his dad, is really good. I feel for his position, and like that character, like he's committed to his wife, and no matter where his son came from, he loves his son. At no point does he, throw in the towel and say, my son is a monster. At no point does he accept it, and at no point would you. And again, in a better movie, even in like this movie, this very story, as strange as it is, that could be so powerful. And I do minimally feel for him, but you talk again about the abrupt ending. His son gets his head blown off in front of him, and he hugs his wife, and the credits roll. And we don't get to feel the tragedy of it. And I do think, I don't know if they cast this guy because he was willing to go through the hell that it would have been to do this prosthetic effects. In the 80s, they used to use like glass for the lenses on your eye instead of whatever material they use now. And a lot of actors really fucked up their eyes from using those things. And the process of those prosthetics, fake skin in front of you with like air bladders underneath that they can inflate. Apparently, it's just an awful experience to go through, and it takes days. Takes days to shoot. So they probably found a guy who was willing to subject himself to that, and then cast around him. I don't know that, Jason. I'm just saying that. I don't think he has the chops as an actor to pull off what is being asked of him. And yeah, I mean, that sucks, but that's how I feel.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Ronnie Cox. That's the best performance, hands down, in the movie. We just have a bunch of small town archetypes. We have a corrupt judge. Who was it early in the movie? There's when they go to the I don't know if it's a police station or the town hall or newspaper or something, and there's this woman in there, and she's going for the Southern Caricature Acting Olympics. I mean, it is so over the top in places there. But I guess I just again can't pick on the acting too much here. I mean, they got one face in there. I kind of cared about the girlfriend, even though her entire role is to be the girlfriend. She's her father's abusive, and there's this whole other piece to that, which is connected to the plot there. And like they're screaming, like, get out of town, but then she's not able to. I mean, where I was stuck on it is the movie starts with a rape and ends with a rape. And true. I don't know if they were thinking they would franchise this. It just screamed, okay, there'll be a sequel, and this cycle continues. That I'm sure this girl is now pregnant, and
exactly 16 years from now, this is all going to start all over again. It's sort of that dun dun dun. But the movie, and I say this to its credit, does not make a meal out of this whole raped by a monster thing. In fact, it's crazy how strangely similarly both of those things are shot. We see the woman fall down or thrown down in the mud. We see her clothes torn free, and then we cut away. A different movie would have given us more than we wanted, certainly more than I wanted. And it was, for better or for worse, a necessary, part of the story.
It's a plot point.
As much as I complain about, frivolous romances in other movies, in Terminator, that couple has to have sex so that they can, give birth to the savior of the future. And that's an important plot point. You can justify these things. It's gross, it's nasty, but it is a gross, nasty exploitation monster movie. So again, it doesn't necessarily make me comfortable, but it's not something that I'm going to shame the movie for or admonish it for. That's the story they were telling, and they weren't as exploitive as they could have been. They weren't not exploitive, but they certainly weren't as exploitive as they could have been. But that's pretty faint praise. Listen to the trailer. If you're curious at all about this movie, it says the last 30 minutes of this movie is so grueling and intense. Yeah, you can watch the last 30 minutes. You'll, by context, understand what the first hour was. And in the end, you won't have missed that much, but you will have seen the juicy 80s special effects. That is not high praise.
I would much rather see the last 30 minutes of Terror Train, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah, a totally different movie. Maybe that's not a fair comparison, but I just... most of the characters were one or two dimensional in nature. I didn't care about character I was supposed to care about, and I wasn't particularly scared by anything or impressed. I guess the special effects are all right, but like Altered States, despite its pace, is way more interesting than this movie.
Agreed. Again, like, I'm not making a lot of excuses for it. I wish that The Beast Within was the movie I wanted it to be. It is not. Mm-hmm. Good enough?
Remake.
Before the initiation begins, the subjects are studied. Even their dreams are recorded. Before the initiation begins, the testing areas are selected. The sorority house, the sanitarium, the empty shopping mall.
Delta Rho Chi.
And just before the initiation begins, a toast is required.
To being young, staying young, and dying young.
The initiation.
Delta Rho Chi be with you.
A fraternal tradition for over 100 years.
Delta Rho Chi.
Created for only one purpose.
Pleasant dreams.
The initiation. The ceremony that will never die, as long as new blood is pledged.
Never will die. Delta Rho Chi. Never will die.
So here's the interesting thing for me about the initiation. It's a fairly well-remembered, if very familiar slasher movie of the 80s that I somehow, even though I was a fervent fan of the genre at the time, missed. This is an 80s slasher movie that I caught up with in the last 5 or 10 years. I don't have this fun attachment to it from my youth. And I'm wondering if that's why I like it. Because it really does, it feels like it would fit right in with like that kind of thing that I would have rented and felt forbidden when I was a kid. There is like every cliche imaginable for a cliche movie in this, and it does have the 1980s superfluous titty like
yeah.
Where I was saying in the previous review, they had some nudity, but there was context for it, at least justified by the story. This is the type of movie that will cut to a woman in a shower for no good goddamn reason. This is the kind of movie where a woman will see a shirt on a mannequin in the store that they're crashing in at the night and just steal the shirt off it and change in front of us for no reason. There's kind of like an hilarious level of exploitation to the movie, which I have to say made me laugh, and I kind of weirdly found charming. However, unpolitically correct that might be. It would almost be like a movie nowadays could make a joke out of that if they had like a running gag where just for no reason we cut to titty. Like, this movie's definitely guilty of that. That's not the reason to like the movie either. It also has some interesting faces in it. Clu Gallagher is a guy I love. He's like a character actor. He was in, such immortal movies as Return of the Living Dead and Nightmare on Elm Street 2. But he's got this unmistakable mug and unmistakable delivery. I always like to see him. Vera Miles, famous classic vintage Hitchcock actress. And, of course, the introduction of Daphne Zuniga. As it turns out, surprise, spoilers everyone, playing 2 roles in this movie for her film debut. There's a lot of bumps in the road. There's a lot of familiar stuff, I really remember being off-put by the opening, where there's a whole sequence where these girls get woken up and all of these women are chanting whatever their Greek Alpha Omega chant to join the stupid
thing.
And man, I swear it goes on like forever. They do this chant for like, it feels like the first 10 minutes of the movie, and I was like, oh dude, if they do this for the whole movie, I'm not gonna be happy. It's interesting that, like, I don't know why they called the movie The Initiation. In the end of days, like, it's so much more about this girl, finding out this riddle from her past and this revelation of this thing that she witnessed. wasn't maybe necessarily something that she did, but maybe that her twin sister did, who got committed, who her parents decided to not tell her about for reasons that don't make sense. But all of that is more interesting than this whole, campus initiation plot storyline. I just don't know why they hung the movie on the initiation, not the lost daughter, not the tragic past. It seems a strange choice. For all the flaws, I kind of like the movie.
I think there are a million other titles they could have for sure. Here's my attempt at defending it. I'm not going to defend it too hard. The initiation involves breaking into the main girl's rich father's
shopping center
department store, and so that's the initiation, and that's where the bulk of the action in the movie happens. So that's the initiation, I guess. But there could be another title for it, and that would be perfectly fine, because then I wouldn't. To me, it's like The Invited, The Initiation. There's so many the horror movies, it kind of gets lost as a result of that.
Oh, titles can be tricky. I get it. I mean, it's not a real oh, how dare they? It's just of all the angles they were playing in the story, that didn't seem like such a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's another case of me, growing up in this era and just kind of being charmed by it. None of the choices that are being made by this film are choices that would be made by a film that was made today. And for me, that makes the movie kind of absurd and entertaining. It's got its foolish moments, and it keeps on trying to lead you directions that are false. This whole guy with the burned face that's following Daphne's nigga character around, there's just no way he's the killer, you guys. There's just no way he's the bad guy.
Yeah. No, they point to that, and they have a scene. It's one of these really bad scenes in a mental institution, I guess, really early in the film, and then we see him in the garden, and some nurses who are supposed to be like this B-movie Nurse Ratched or something is scoffing at him, looking in or whatever. And then we hear about this escape that happens, and we're just kind of not quite sure what it's about, but it's a little bit of a false lead. I don't know why I'm this and Terror Train are the two movies that I'm letting a lot of stuff pass, because I was just so entertained by it. I'll allow my whatever side to come out to, the mid 80s or not, these are very, very attractive women in this movie too. And so the one friend in there, she kept reminding me of Taylor Swift for some reason. I don't know why. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
For whatever reason, roller skates, and and then the main girl, and what's the actor's name too? I have to
Daphne Zuniga. Daphne Zuniga plays the main character.
Yeah, and she's a very attractive young woman too, and as portrayed in this movie. I probably should have. It's weird. I probably should have seen the plot twist at the end coming, but I didn't, and that's why I like it in a first pass with all of these, so then they get equal weight here. So some of the movies I knew exactly what was going to happen, even though how they got there wasn't as obvious. This one, once it happened, it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because when it's first revealed with the plot twist, I'm like, no, that's illogical. There's no way that could have happened. It's like, oh, okay, we went for spoilers, folks. The twin thing.
Yeah.
We went for the evil twin idea, and that's. But I didn't even mind that. I really didn't mind it.
What you think is happening, or what they want you to think is happening, is that this guy who's stalking her is doing all these kills. But then they want you to think, oh, super twist, she's doing all the kills. But logically, with what we've seen, that doesn't make sense. So, boom, she has a twin that we've not seen until the last seconds of the movie. And her parents have lied to her about this for her entire life for reasons. I mean, I guess her twin sister ended up inadvertently killing her dad, and the guy she thinks is her dad was actually the lover. It gets very complicated.
It is very
and silly and
it's
convoluted
too.
and again, why the parents would choose to handle it this way. It's as dumb as The Beast Within, which you and I were just admonishing really hardcore. But there's something goofy and charming about Initiation, where there's something kind of ugly and stilted about The Beast Within. This is the kind of 80s movie that like everybody pays homage to with modern horror movies. They're always like saying how much they love these types of movies. But at the same time, if someone was to make a movie like this today, they would be shunned. Oh, how dare you be so exploitive? How dare you be so obvious with your filmmaking? You know what? I'm at the point where I would totally be into just a bone straight slasher movie, right? And that's what this is.
That'd be nice.
It's got a little bit more, unnecessary nudity than it needs, but that's kind of charming. It's got a couple of interesting character after faces, which adds to the flavor of the stew. There's some bad characterizations in it, which again kind of adds to there's weird threads to the storyline that don't seem to pay off. The major bitch of the movie, I don't really feel gets a proper recompense ever. There's just a lot of stuff that go unanswered, and the movie is sloppy. I guess it's similarly to how I was talking about The Tourist Trap for me, in that whatever about this movie that works for me might not have been entirely on purpose. It just might be this kismet of all of these things falling together in this perfect way. And maybe if I saw it even in 1985 or whenever it came out, I might not have liked it as much then. But when I got my hands on a copy of this a few years ago and watched it, man, I had a huge smile on my face and I just kept the popcorn coming in. Is it highly... It's not highly memorable, but it gets the job done. It's entertainment.
Me too. I really enjoyed it. I mean, there's a couple of these huge sequences involving the psychology professor,
right?
Was kind of whatever type of relationship with this undergraduate main character, and is trying to help her analyze her dreams, because she keeps having the same nightmare over and over again, which relates to this event that becomes important. And I thought, plus there was this research assistant who seemed to be screaming to me, this is, for whatever reason, maybe she's attacking people because she's jealous and she wants the attention of this professor. But that stuff kind of goes different than I expected, and that's okay. But that could also be viewed as a little bit of a diversion from the main idea of the film. But I didn't mind it. I like that stuff.
There's something crazy about that scientist assistant character. Was her name Heidi? I can't remember. She looks so 80s. She looks like she's dying of 80s. She strangely reminded me of the character Barb from Stranger Things, the late lamented Barb character, who's just her inner insecurities are so represented by her outer appearance that it feels hilariously on the nose. But I don't even know if it was on purpose. When they made the movie, were we supposed to laugh on sight at that character? And she's giving credible information, she's giving credible plot points, but I just think she's fucking hilarious. I don't know why.
I think if this was a comedy, Melissa McCarthy, or maybe a younger Melissa McCarthy, would play that role. I mean, that's kind of what it made me think. But I thought there would be more of a payoff with her.
Yeah, she's like a character that wandered out of Napoleon Dynamite into this movie, out of fucking nowhere. But again, it's a not unwelcome ingredient.
I don't know if I think about this movie too much.
It falls apart.
Questioning why I enjoyed it, but this is another one where I'm not prepared to fight with it, and I just had such a good time with it that it's a very positive review. So, yeah, and it was a nice surprise, because that first couple of scenes, you're right, when we're seeing that cult-like sorority thing happen, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna dig this movie, but then. Yeah, keep watching after the first 10 minutes, and I think you'll enjoy it.
It's an is what it is movie. It is what it is. And if you like that, enjoy.
Soon the world will awake to a terrifying riptide of humanoids from the deep.
We think we know where these things come from, but we have no idea how many there are.
Earth plunges into a battle for the survival of the fittest, where man is the endangered species and woman the ultimate prize. Anywhere you run, any place you hide, anytime you stop, they will find you. Doug McClure, Anne Turkel, Vic Morrow. Humanoids from the deep.
Humanoids from the deep. This is where we're going to finish our 6 ranks today. And I've been talking a lot about a lot of these movies have stuff in them that we just don't see anymore, and whether or not maybe that's a good or bad thing. This is a bluntly simple, like 78-minute Roger Corman, cheapy exploitation feature about fish monsters that come out of the ocean, they rape women, and they kill men. And that's it. I mean, we get to know a little bit of this community, and there's some really racist characters, and there's a Native American character, and hilariously, the arc of the movie seems to be the Native guy could be causing problems for the community, and the racist guy is really racist. But in the end of the day, they're both okay guys. In spite of being racist, he's okay, and in spite of being Native, he's okay. It's just laughably out of tune. Hilariously out of tune, enjoyably out of tune. I can understand someone who wants to be offended by this being offended by that. And if you're not offended by that, then you can be offended by the amount of women who, again, are getting raped by fish monsters or are running, and inexplicably as they're running, their boobs falling out of their shirts. It is...
It's full frontal, too. It's not...
Oh, yeah. They go all out. It's hard to quantify the level of exploitation and cheesiness, but there's also craft here. I do have to say, it's not poorly made. The special effects were made by Rob Bottin, who did The Thing and RoboCop, and he went on to do amazing stuff. And the score.
Yeah, it was Howard Shore.
Howard Shore. Again, another guy who would go on to great things. It's
when
one
I
of
saw
these...
that, I was blown away.
Yeah.
That was the biggest name in the movie.
It's one of those things where, a lot of people, before they really hit, kind of came together to do this movie. Also interesting, Vic Morrow is in that. He's the gentleman who ended up losing his life while filming the Twilight Zone, the movie. He played the...
Oh, wow.
And once again, much like he was in Twilight Zone, he was playing a racist character in this movie. But the movie's not about the redemption of a racist character. The movie's not about, it's not about anything except for sea monsters attacking people. And it doesn't apologize for that. Apparently they only had 3 suits, so during the big attack on the festival carnival thing, there's a lot of, corners being cut to try and maximize the amount of monster carnage. And I can't defend a lot of the decisions made in the movie. It is gross, it is exploitive, it is unnecessary, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I'm sorry, it's just how I feel. It's not for all tastes. Some people won't like it. I don't even always like it. And when I said at the introduction of this, this is a kind of movie that doesn't get made and maybe shouldn't, I kind of stand by that. But I stand by the maybe. I get why people get offended by this, but I like to think that, there wasn't a Harvey Weinstein on set, and that everybody who was making this movie knew what they were making and were, game, right? Yeah. So it's a hard movie to review. It's objectively bad, but I enjoy it. So that's where I start with Humanoids from the Deep.
Well, to me, there were 2 movies that were obviously low budget of the 6 here. And this one and Tourist Trap, and I enjoyed this one way more. Because, I just put my brain on hold and just enjoyed the sea creatures attacking the people on this island. It was a fishing island. I'm a bit of a sucker for those story set in those types of communities. It starts off with a little bit of an edge. I mean, the first few victims are a little redheaded boy and then a bunch of dogs. Like, you kill a ton of dogs. It has one of those stupid cat scares that is, unfortunately, is a knock against it. You mentioned everybody kind of knew what was happening. As I understand it, and I'm sorry, I don't have IMDb in front of me to mention the actor's name. The one who plays the female scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she actually said that she'd signed up for a very intelligent science fiction film, and with no sex and no nudity at all. And what it sounds like is after, like, the main part of the story was filmed, a bunch of these sex scenes, like that really strange scene with that couple in the tent with the guy with the ventriloquist.
That was bizarre.
Made no sense at all. They just added a ton of this gratuitous nudity. I mean, this is the most exploitative of the movies we've talked about but it's Roger Corman, so what you expect. Uncredited Roger Corman was connected to this. But yeah, she and, like, I understand her part is kind of about how a greedy corporation ends up polluting the water and creating this monster for the sake of whatever experiments they were doing. It's a little bit of a gimmick for the sci-fi angle, but it's a lot of fun, and like the climactic sequence, it pays off. If you're looking for just brainless B movie entertainment, this is a big thumbs up. There's this really pervy DJ.
Yeah.
They're having this big festival, which, again, much like in Jaws, they shouldn't, with this problem they're having, the authorities say, oh no, we can still have this major festival, even though it's not a good idea. Anyway, this DJ is basically hating on every woman that he can and making these really sexist comments. And so then it's very satisfying to see him get killed in the way that he does. Again,
it is, but at the same time, I can't help, and I wondered as I was watching the movie, when he says about the whoever Miss so and so of the state, or like the woman who was the prettiest woman of the community and was being represented at the fair, he says live on the radio, "I've got her here with me, so I might have my hands full." I don't think we were supposed to judge him for that when we watched this movie in 1980. I honestly think that was supposed to be endearing. I mean, yeah, it gets turned around later when the fish monster attacks. He does try to protect that girl, and the first thing that girl does when the monsters show up is drop her top. But yeah, he does get killed. Yeah. But in a way, I don't know if we were supposed to go at the time, yeah, we do now. But I wonder if at the time we were supposed to go, yeah. Like, the Vic Morrow character is highly problematic. He hates the native character because he's native, and the native character does have a point. These fisheries are destroying the environment. He can shut it down, and probably should. And the Vic Morrow character goes to the point of blowing up the guy's house and trying to kill him. And in spite of that, the movie asks us to not hate this character. He was just doing what was best for the community. Yeah, he might be a rapist. He might be a racist attempted murderer. But at the end of the day, he's not that bad, you guys. Well, you know what? At the end of the day, he's terrible. He's terrible. He is terrible. And it's so crazy that when this movie was made, that like they wanted to be balanced about this. Yeah. Attempted murder. Yeah. Racism. Whatever. And again, I'm asking too much of the movie. The movie is about fish monsters attacking people, and in a way, I'm more bothered by that than I am about the exploitive, like the nudity in the movie. Again, for what it's worth, the creatures are like some water version of Bigfoot. They're human enough that they don't know how to repopulate amongst themselves, so they're going to try to repopulate with us. It's motivated. It's gross, but it's part of the story in a way that, adds to the horror, adds to something, and gives them the excuse to have all of these scenes of exploitation. Yes, of course, this young couple's going to go to a remote beach to get busy, and yes, of course, the guy's going to get killed and the woman's going to get raped. Again, much like I said in The Beast Within, I think they could have been nastier with that than they were, but it's still, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's ugly. It's not something that, if it's a trigger for you, stay far away.
Yeah, I can't recommend, much like, Tourist Trap, I just can't recommend this to a broad group of people that I know, but the ones that I think will enjoy this for what it is.
Yeah.
The other half of that story about the actor who played the scientist, she actually tried to get the movie not to be released. She tried to stop it from release. That's how much she was.
Oh wow.
She was unaware of what movie she was in. So when you said that preamble about, well, they knew what they were doing, she really didn't know what what was being done with this movie. So.
Well, I think you're right in that the movie is very aware of Jaws. It would have to be in 1980. Jaws being the fact that a kid gets it right away at the beginning. Again, I think we can thank Jaws for that if we want to thank anything. But for what it's worth, it does sort of start the movie saying, no rules. Everybody's on the table. Yeah. And much like the rape angle of the story, do I like the idea of a child being killed? No, but it if you're going to do it for a reason, and it boosts the stakes right away. It makes you think, oh, holy crap, that's where they're going. Or alternately, it's something that tells you, if you're not liking this is the first scene of the movie, so you can feel free to stop right now if this is not what you're into. Yeah. I guess I respect the honesty of this movie. I've talked in the past about movies like Funny Games or like some of these like art house statement horror movies that say, shame on you for wanting this, shame on you for liking this, you're making us do this, so you're somehow complicit in this, you're part of the villainy, you're part of the badness. I don't believe in filmmakers wagging their finger at me. I think the people who made this movie because this is the kind of movie they enjoyed watching, and they made it for people who enjoy watching this type of movie. I mean, it's a hard movie to defend, but like I have fun with it in a sort of guilty pleasure kind of way. But it's practically like a subset of pornography as far as some people are concerned. Like it is what it is. So it's one of those movies that it's going to rank higher on the list than people maybe think that it deserves for me, but I think that you have to grade it on that measure. What was the movie trying to be? Did it succeed on that measure? I think it does. Is it exploitive? Yeah, but it's a pure exploitation film, it knows what it is, and it doesn't pretend to be something else. I think that's what really rubs me the wrong way. Like, say what you will about Basic Instinct. Basic Instinct had no problem with being Basic Instinct. Don't be ashamed of yourself, or don't shame me for wanting to watch it. Yeah. If you sign up to watch a movie called Humanoids from the Deep, you should come in with a certain expectation, and those expectations will be met.
It doesn't. It leaves, even though it's an exploitation film, it certainly doesn't leave you with a nasty taste in your mouth that, say, when we've reviewed Apt Pupil or Dreamcatcher.
Right.
Movies like that, which are considered higher art than this.
Well, and again, I'm framing it from the time it came out, right? This is 1980. It was a different world. It was 40 years ago. And so I will grade it for the world that it was born from. If it came out today, I might be saying, wow, you guys really kind of took that far. Almost to a way where my hat's off. Like, that took balls. Yeah. You're going to lose friends over this movie. That's to quote the dude, this is a movie that just fits right in there, right in its time and place. Good enough?
Perfect. Yeah.
I am rolling. So there it was. Those were 6 retro horror movies reviewed. So now we get to the rank part of this. And before I pressed record, I told you, like, we're not going to rank. I just know from listening to these reviews, we're not going to rank the same. It's not going to be 6 for 6. I'd be surprised if it was 0 for 6, but it's not going to be 6 for 6. But I'm going to take it personally. Again, these are movies of my youth. And I think somebody who didn't grow up with this particular aesthetic kind of, like, around them would react differently. So I think what's true with one is kind of true with all of these. They're of a very specific niche and aesthetic, and if you like that aesthetic, I think you'll have fun with these movies, even the best and worst parts of them. They kind of are what they are, but it's very, very specific. So it's all shades of gray. It's like picking a bunch of your favorite shade of gray out of 6 different shades of gray in some respects. There are certainly some that are better than others. I think we're going to agree on the bottom at least, but let's have it, Jason. What was your least favorite and why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I came to horror through literature first and then into my teens a little bit more, so I guess it wasn't from the beginning. So, and they were always kind of taboo movies to me, so it would have been interesting if I had experienced these ones at the age that you did, at least 5 of the 6, but... Least number 6 for me is Tourist Trap, but I do have to admit it. I mean, it's not anywhere close to the worst thing I've ever seen, and it does bring in some really creepy moments. But I just the acting distracted me, and I just had more trouble with it. Even though there could be arguments about enjoying this one more than some of the other ones I'm going to mention. Yeah. Number 5 is The Beast Within. I really don't. It's a more polished looking movie, but it's kind of dull in places. I didn't really care about anyone, and wasn't as much fun as the other ones. So those would be the only 2 that I'd put my thumbs down to for this.
Okay.
The other 4, surprisingly, are recommendations, even though I have to be careful who I recommend some of these movies to.
Yeah.
Number 4 for me is Humanoids from the Deep. I did maybe sounded really positive about it, and I am. It is a low budget B movie, but it has its problems, but it is a lot of fun. There just isn't a whole lot more to it than that. It's probably the most well, it's an exploitation film, so it has the most exploitation of any of these, but it didn't ruin some movies. It ruins it for me. Others it doesn't. And this one was just pure fun. I think a lot of people can have fun with it. Number 3, and I think the top 3 are a little bit tough here, but I just had to go with my heart maybe more than my head in some cases. The Initiation's number 3. I would revisit The Initiation. I enjoyed it. You can get past the first couple scenes quite a bit. There's a lot of familiar stuff in here. There's a lot of cliches. There's a range of acting, but on the whole, I left this movie with a big smile on my face, and I enjoyed it. Surprisingly to me, because when I was watching the first half an hour, 45 minutes of it, I thought Altered States would be my number 1. And I just thought, well, it's kind of in a different league than the rest of these movies. But oddly enough, the pace in this one bothered me. And, I'm somebody who watches like 3-4 hour movies. I don't mind a long sit or anything like that. But Altered States was number 2 for me. I would recommend it probably of these 6 movies to the most number of people. William Hurt's awesome in it. Bob Balaban's great. The special effects are terrific. Wonderful music score. So it is enjoyable, but it felt longer than it actually is, because it's not actually that long a movie. But weirdly enough, my number 1 was Terror Train. I just keep thinking about that one, and despite its problems, and there are problems in it, I had a lot of fun with it. And I just it's set on a train, and there's a little bit of a mystery, and all these people are being killed, and whether I buy that they're medical students or not, it's and maybe it's just a little bit. We've talked about the types of horror movies I like, and I do like slashers maybe a little bit more than creature features. But Terror Train, this is one where I just am wrestling with. Maybe it should be number 3, but I have to go with my heart, and Terror Train surprised me. I really, really enjoyed it. So,
wow. Well,
that's my list of 6.
I have to say, Jason,
you thought, right?
My preamble was complete bullshit. Congratulations, we have just gone 0 for 6. And for real, like, we did go 0 for 6. I have the stack in front of me. I'm not lying to you this time. You have won a prize, my friend. You have won. I don't know if you can see it through here. A VHS screener copy of Chairman of the Board, starring Carrot Top.
Nice.
It's both VHS and a screener copy, so like I don't think you could get rid of it if you wanted to. Like legally, it's not meant to be sold, so it's your problem now. But maybe you can review Chairman of the Board on your podcast sometime.
I think I can, yeah.
I'm going to go through my list. I'm surprised. It's not just that we went 0 for 6, but, like, we disagreed. We're very different. I put The Beast Within dead last. And maybe it's part of me wanting it to be more because of, like, that idea I built up of it in my head when I was a kid. It has a cool transformation sequence and, like, I guess a watchable last half an hour. But the movie's 98 minutes long. So you want all 98 of those minutes to be entertaining, not just the last 30. Try a little harder. But take a breath. In 5th place, Terror Train. It's weird because, like, it has all the elements that should be there. We've got our 80s Scream Queen. We've got a claustrophobic environment. We've got Halloween costumes. We've got, all of the pieces are here, but for some reason it just doesn't close the deal for me. It's a completely adequate example of what a slasher movie of the 80s looks like, but already when this movie came out, it was being outpaced by other slasher movies around it. So I'm just lukewarm on it, like only just lukewarm. I might have been overselling it in the review. It ranked higher for you, but in 4th place I'm putting The Initiation. Totally is what it is movie. It is what it is. It's much like the Terror Train. Like it's a template slasher movie, but I think it just hits the beats a little bit. It made me smile. Whereas Terror Train, I just was kind of like nodding along. Yes, this is the inevitable scene that happens here. Why are we spending so much time with the crew? The Initiation, even when I felt I was being manipulated by the burn victim father figure or exploring the hypnosis thing, trying to unlock her dream or her secret, I was never bored by the movie the way at times I was in Terror Train, I have to admit. So now we're getting into the personal territory for top 3. Tourist Trap managed to get all the way to 3rd place for me. It's an uncanny thing, though. Like I said in the review, I don't know how all these components came together to add up to creepy for me, but they kind of did. There's something about those whispering mannequins, man. There's a feel to the movie. It doesn't have the teeth and tissue or the exploitative nudity that the other movies have, but it doesn't need them. It's not reliant on them. It's still an effective horror movie, and it's PG, and it's 1979. A rarer thing for its occasion.
It's a bit of a skinny dip scene at the beginning.
Yeah? Well, they got away with it anyway. All the way, and this seems ridiculously high, in 2nd place, I'm putting Humanoids from the Deep. What's your movie? What is it trying to be? I think one of the best choices is making it 78 minutes long. Like, it moves so fast you don't really have that much time to think about it. It's not a movie that was meant to be reviewed. It's a movie that was meant to be watched and kind of forgot. It's a cheapy horror movie. But it knows that it's a cheapy horror movie, and I think it's pretty good at being a cheapy horror movie. If the exploitation is going to bother you, it is going to bother you, and just, it's not for you. The way the next Katherine Heigl rom-com is not for me, this movie is not for you. But I don't know, I'm charmed by it. In a weird, perverse way, I find the movie charming. But I think at number 1 is Altered States because it's the closest thing to a legit film. I mean, it feels like it's about something more than just like horror and exploitation. And I like horror and exploitation, and you can be just about that. But there's ideas to this. There's ambition to this. It introduced the world to William Hurt, and I thought that was a good thing for the world to have. Like I said, even though they're incredibly dated, I love the special effects in this movie. It's a walk, not a run, but I think if you're in the right mood for it, and I think you'll know when you are, it's just one of those movies, you know. I feel like having my brain melted tonight. Let's try Altered States.
Yeah.
Then you can do it. Don't start it too late. It's not something that you start after 10 o'clock at night, but it's worth your time. In this list, I'm putting it number 1. It also stands out from the other ones. Like, I kind of dismissively called it kind of sort of a creature feature because it has that aspect to it, but it's very different than the rest of the list. It comes out in the same era, and it's a horror movie, but it's like almost every other way. It's a different animal.
It had a much bigger budget for sure, and I could say I'm just a little bit dissatisfied with the end. And I think it's close to. It was a little bit of it was nearly number 1 for me, but I don't know what it is about Terror Train that just. I got a lot of joy from that movie, and I didn't, have to think about it too much. So
awesome.
Yeah,
we did it, brother. You kind of sort of won. You got a prize.
I did. I was so excited last time that we were 1%.
This time you did it for real. It's funny because I thought like the one we were gonna like have disagreed on was like the tourist trap, but well, I mean, I guess in our list that's the biggest difference. But like the Beast Within, Terror Train, like I had it in 5th place. You had first. So like not only was it different, it was different not the way I expected it to be. But that's fine. That's fine. I'm glad that you didn't. There was a real chance I had in my head that you were going to be doing this episode. I'm like, okay, whatever list we do next, it's going to have to be a better list than this, Larry, or I'm not going to enjoy Rank and Review anymore. So the fact that you actually would give thumbs up to 4 out of 6, that's good. I mean, my guess is the average person maybe would be 3 out of 6. maybe about half of these movies would work for people, but I'm glad that you had a good time with this one because, like I said, it could have gone either way, and now you have chairman of the board, so it all worked out.
Yes, yeah, perfect.
Thanks so much.
I'm supposed to be getting rid of my movies. That's my podcast, which has been really, really hard. You're smart to just rank them. I've been losing some movies here where it's been painful lately. So
you realize you don't have to do that. This is something you're doing to yourself.
I am, yeah. But I wanted to have a certain angle to my show, so that's how it's working out. So
well, thanks for saying that. So I can give it an excuse for one more time to shout out the Shelf Shedding Movie Show, hosted by Jason Dubray. He gets rid of one of his movies, sometimes 2 of his movies, depending on the math on a given show. So there's personal losses for Jason every episode. So you owe him your ears for that. Check out the Shelf Shedding Movie Show. And I have this sneaking feeling like Jason will be back someday.
Yeah. You won't have to twist.
I won't have to twist your arm? Oh, okay. Good to know.
No, you won't. No.
Cheers, brother. Well, look at that. We have a 0 for 6 episode in the books again. Look at that. Not in one place did Jason and I agree this week. It must be super helpful for my listeners. If you have feedback, please send that feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. I'm your host and Random Canadian Larry Parsons. I do appreciate your ears. Please tell that other movie fan in your life about the show. Please check out the website at Ranknreview.ca. If you're hungry for more podcasts, I invite you to fill your ears with the Terror Table podcast. Welcome to Riverdale podcast and Cobwebs, a Gothic horror podcast, as well as, of course, Jason Dubray's own podcast, The Shelf Shedding Movie Show. Rank and Review drops every other Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening.